Merissa Khurma is founder and CEO of Amina Strategies, a DC-based firm fostering U.S. MENA connections through policy analysis, strategic communications, and through leadership on geopolitics, energy, migrations, and gender dynamics. With 20 plus years in foreign policy, she directed the Wilson Center's Middle East program until 2025, spearheading programs on regional security, economic development, and women's initiatives. A former Jordanian diplomat and Georgetown adjunct professor, she holds a master in public administrations from Harvard, a master's of science from Georgetown University, and a bachelor's from McGill University in Canada. Merissa, thank you so much coming here, joining us in our international, our DC studio. We're very glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Again, because we are working with International, I have to bring this up every time we have a conversation. So your last name is Khurma,
yes,
which is for us Farsi. We can say it Khurma, yes, which is the actual date, correct?
Correct. Yes, it is definitely a Persian name. So it's Merissa date, yes.
So we can say Khurma easily because
Khurma,
we have that in our 100%. English language. Yeah. Lots of things happen in the region right now. Still, the change is still ongoing. Is it some of it is fundamental? We've never seen anything like this in last decades. Let's start with military intervention or military attacks that Israel did, not to Lebanon, but also expanded it to Yemen and expanded it to Iran. Mm-hmm. Some would say that kind of behavior expedited some kind of a change or caused some kind of a real change. Some would say it might did something instantly, but eventually it's going to either backfire or go to another direction. Mm-hmm. How do you assess what's happening mm-hmm. over there regarding with that military action that went on?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Israel that we are looking at today is pursuing a military strategy that's very much based on the post-October 7th security mindset. So they are not going to wait for anything to come to them. This was a colossal failure for them from the military and security standpoint. And so they're going to preempt every threat that they deem a threat to their national existence. And so that's why we saw this brutal, intense warfare in Gaza, and they did not stop there. We saw that in Lebanon, we saw that in Yemen, and of course they were also essentially bombing urban centers where they, at least according to them, they're going after military leaders of, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Yemen, the Houthis. And then finally there was the direct standoff with Iran, which everybody in the policymaking community did not see that coming. We always talked about what that would look like, but then it finally happened for 12 days this summer. And then it dragged the United States administration into it as well with a strike against nuclear facilities. So yes, it certainly raises the level of tensions in the region. And I do want to add one more to the mix, because I think where things started to really shift tremendously, even after the 12-day war in June, is when Bibi Netanyahu decided they needed to attack Hamas leaders in Qatar. That really caused a lot of concern in the region about what they're calling Israel's overreach. There's consensus now that Iran may be a threat, but Israel is equally a threat to their national security. And of course, this is a delicate topic to raise with this administration because the United States remains to regard Israel as a key strategic ally and partner in the region. And it's a partnership and bond that does not really apply to the rest of the Arab world. And so, yes, lots of tectonic shifts, but if we're looking at it zooming out, we've seen a weakened axis of resistance that Iran has been investing in for decades. We've seen a weakened Iran. I think for now there's a bit of quiet and relative quiet, of course, because we're still seeing ongoing bombings in Gaza and military incursions as well in Lebanon. But I think for now this relative quiet is temporary. Because I do not see all of these non-state actors and their patrons in Iran stopping. They're going, if anything, it's going to encourage them to go back and invest even more. Even though, of course, the Iranians have suffered great losses and they are suffering even more economically. But it's going to be a very difficult period because we need a U.S. Administration that's politically invested in the entire process in order to stop and start rebuilding, because the damage that has been done over the last 2 years and the loss of innocent civilians is absolutely monumental. And this is where the people of the region have also had enough of war. There's war fatigue across the board. But I don't see war fatigue in the Israeli military establishment. I don't see the Iranians sitting back necessarily. I think that from their standpoint, from a national security standpoint, that they will continue to rebuild. And in fact, we've seen even in Gaza how Hamas was able to recruit and rebuild and reboot, similarly with Hezbollah, because they have a recruiting strategy and they have resources. They continue to have resources, and this is the challenge moving forward.
I have a quick follow-up on that. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we have a calm situation now, which is temporary, and you see it's inevitable that Iranians' proxies will resurge and return or so. Do you see any timeline of what happens to that and what can stop it or change it or prolong it?
I mean, the one thing that could perhaps stop or delay would be the restarting of negotiations with the United States, between Iran and the United States. We've heard President Trump yesterday talk about essentially the Iranians asking if the U.S. sanctions could be lifted, which is obviously a sign that they're suffering from these sanctions. And he didn't really give much away, but it is an indication that he's open when they're open. And we've heard from the Iranian president as well saying that, well, Iran wants peace. It's a message that we hear all the time, but they're only ready to negotiate with the United States if it stops supporting Israel. We also know that's not going to happen. But it's in the best interest of both parties to restart the negotiations, because the ongoing or this never-ending war scenario is not going to end well for Israel, and it's not going to end well for the Iranians, and certainly not for all the other key allies in the region who have suffered as well. Because, I mean, the GCC has not been impacted with the exception of Qatar, right, with this latest attack, in terms of actual conflict on their own territory. But they have their own grandiose plans when it comes to diversification of the economy, and jobs, investments, and you cannot really do that. You cannot economically integrate with Europe and the rest of the world if you have all these pockets of lingering conflict and never-ending cycles of violence. And so it is in the best interest of everyone to move forward. And to do that, again, you need strong political will on both sides, frankly, with regards to the United States and Iran. But it seems that this is something that President Trump was very intent on. So let's see if this is still a goal. We have to wait and see, because so far they've been pursuing maximum pressure, as they did with the first Trump administration, with the exception of these talks that were held in Oman and took place. But of course, all of this was disrupted by the 12-day war.
On that calculation about the Iranians and United States, for more or less most of the time after the revolution in Iran, the policy on Iran was a little bit nuanced in the United States, but not that much of a drastic between the two parties. It has drastic changes since Obama with JCPOA, then Trump with withdrawing from it, and now coming back. And this military action, which was, it was always on the table, but never implemented. Knowing what Trump administration does and wants to do you think it's advisable for the Iranians to take Trump on his word and make a deal with him, or maybe wait for the next Obama to come so they can go to the other side of the spectrum and go back to whatever like JCPOA, for example, was?
Well, that is $1 million question, because of course there was a lot of trust lost. Not that there was a lot of trust to begin with, right? And of course you have to build it over time. There have been questions about U.S. security guarantees and discussions also in the GCC after the Israeli attack on Qatar, and whether the Trump administration had previous knowledge, right? So these are very important questions to be had, but we also know that unpredictability and uncertainty is pretty much the only predictable factor about this Trump administration and about President Trump himself. We do know that he ran on a platform that is very much focused on peacemaking, peace through strength in particular, and ending wars. And so that is a promise that he made during his campaign, as well as in his inaugural address to the American people. And non-intervention and stopping wars is very much a key cornerstone of where his base is, the MAGA movement. So we have to see whether he will pursue this and how far he will go. But it's certainly a calculation that the Iranian regime has to make that will, benefit them as they are suffering economically in particular, and whether not pursuing that path. It's about really the cost of not pursuing that path right now, because they've already been hit once, and I think that was a miscalculation on their side when Trump was threatening with that. It was not perceived that it will ever happen, but then it did. So that's a lesson learned. So it's really more about, well, what is the cost of not engaging for Iran with the United States? And I think it is in the best interest of both parties and the region to encourage this dialogue to take place.
I think go back to the first question that I asked you, and you said there are conflicts all around the region, and you cannot either diversify or invest. That's what I would love to see. Because if the resurgence of the Iran proxy is going to happen, we're not going to see that. But at the same time, if the current trend stands and Iran changes course, foreign policy-wise, that might be like a new era in the region that many wanted to see, but they've never had seen.
I don't think there will be a complete shift on the Iranian side. Because the ultimate goal for them is regime survival and preservation. They have to do a lot to maintain strength as well, and project strength, which right now they're in a difficult position precisely because of all the losses in the proxy network. But the longer they wait, and the longer other parties wait in the region as well as the United States, the the longer this vacuum exists. And that is how a lot of these groups reemerge, rearm, and then build up. And it might not happen overnight or in the next 6 months, but it's certainly, they certainly have all the incentives to do so. And that's why U.S. leadership is really important. And it's not just about a ceasefire here and a ceasefire there. It's about a comprehensive approach. It's about a strategy that is focused on not just lowering the heat, but just putting out the fire once and for all. Because lowering the heat as a crisis management strategy clearly has not worked. And so there's a lot of work to do. The question remains, is this American administration ready to pursue such a strategy? They seem to be, working on one issue at a time. But what is the plan? They don't necessarily have a clear plan beyond the statements that we hear from President Trump about ending wars and peace through strength. So again, I want to repeat this because it is really in the best interest of both parties. And I think the Arab allies of the United States, particularly in the GCC, have a huge stake as well in ensuring and encouraging this dialogue and making sure that they're part of that process as well. I mean, we've seen normalization between Iran and various Arab countries. With a country like Qatar, for example, the U.S. military base, Al Udeid, in Qatar was attacked during the 12-day war. But then we've seen, the Iranian president and other delegation members visit, actually days before Hamas leaders were targeted in Doha, and meet with the leadership. And so even after that, there were, there's more conversations, more discussions. And so a lot of these countries recognize as well that now that Iran is weakened, they're in a better position to maintain this diplomatic dialogue and maintain these open channels with Iran. But that's not going to be enough.
You said the policy of the United States should be not just putting out the fire, but come with some kind of a solution that just makes it permanent. If they were supposed to follow this route, what they should do, what are the steps that you want them to see and take? For example, I remember when Biden wanted to bring President Biden wanted to bring United States back to the JCPOA, like Senator Murphy in Congress, Democrat, said United States should drop all sanctions, so get the Iranians get back. Lots of people were discussing that's not even possible in the United States.
Yeah.
For this strategy that you want to see, fire is put out, but just want to see it normalized and permanent. What are the steps that U.S. should take that you would advise them to do so?
I mean, it's a comprehensive strategy that includes various interventions, right? So like on the Palestinian-Israeli track, which is very important because now you have Gaza is essentially, half occupied by Gaza and half controlled by Hamas and other emerging militant groups, which is even more worrisome. Actually moving forward, again, the 20-point plan is a good starting point, but doubling down on a process that everybody in the region can buy into. I think this was an argument made by many leaders in the region, from the Saudi king and the Crown Prince to the King of Jordan and the President of Egypt, President Sisi, that essentially if you resolve this, you are weakening a lot of these non-state actors, and because you're giving the Palestinians and Israelis an alternative to violence. But of course, this argument has kind of worn out over time because we haven't seen any progress. And this is not going to happen overnight. And it's not going to happen because of the Trump administration. This is really about a political commitment over time. But it can absolutely work because he's demonstrated President Trump has, that he can really pressure Bibi Netanyahu and can really impact the Israelis, can really influence the Israelis, given that special relationship that both countries have. And I think this is where they can make a difference, or he can make a difference. And similarly, with regards to the relationship with other countries where there are armed groups that are supported and financed by Iran, including Iraq. And, Iraq is another country that, particularly with the current leadership, he's been talking, President Soudani has been talking a lot more about the importance of, disarming the militias, where, with the official language of that the only Iraqis who should be holding arms or using arms is essentially the Iraqi military. But there are lots of steps to be taken there too, and they do need American support. They do need American investments. They do need to re-invite and re-engage American businesses as well in order to benefit their economy, and balance this relationship between a strong alliance with the United States and good neighborly relations with Iran, replacing this intervention that we've seen over the decades since the fall of Saddam. So that's another example. And then finally, with Iran directly, President Trump has already demonstrated that he's ready to engage directly, and of course use the good offices of other countries in the region, such as Oman, perhaps even Qatar, that has demonstrated that they can be brokers too in other scenarios, to move forward in that direction. Lifting sanctions right away, I don't see that happening. It has to be a phased approach, because there's also no trust, as we talked about. And in order to build trust, both sides have to demonstrate that they are ready to give up and give up certain things and give back, right? So it's certainly a process, but those are the main issues that we're seeing. And of course, if we go to North Africa, there's a lot more happening. But in the Levant, in the Middle East side of the MENA, these are certainly approaches that should at least be invested in the short term, because otherwise we're going to be sucked back right into these non-ending cycles of violence.
I want to move to a little bit closer in that area in Lebanon. I think Hezbollah is going to the same phase that Hamas is doing. They wanted them to disarm, put your arms down, be part of the government. Do you think that's possible over there? Because Hezbollah is much more stronger than Hamas. They have much more financial network. They probably are the
internationally as well.
They are probably they were supposed to be, but I don't know now. But they were the most strong proxy of Iran in that part of the world, with a huge network on so many levels. Do you think that could be done with Hezbollah, with disarming and?
It has to be done, and it can be done. But can it be done with the speed that the Trump administration is expecting? Absolutely not. There's also a domestic political component to it that has to be addressed. The president of Lebanon, General Aoun, and others in the government have been working very closely with the United States, and they do want to move forward. But of course, there are tremendous challenges. Hezbollah is significantly weakened, but they're not out of the game. As you mentioned, they've been the strongest proxy and sort of like the poster child of this axis of resistance that Iran has been investing in, and they do still have an international network and lots of sources of financial support that will help them rebuild. And that's where the U.S. role comes into play as well, because as long as there are incursions in the south of Lebanon by the Israelis and bombings, which, by the way, have not stopped since the ceasefire has been in place, in Lebanon. Then again, going back to this, like the raison d'être of Hezbollah will continue to exist. Well, the Israeli occupation. Well, the Israelis are still, and so I think this is where the U.S. administration can rein in the Israelis as well to make sure that, you know, the Lebanese government will be able to move forward with its plans. But Lebanon needs the financial support that the United States is promising. They need all the financial support they get. They hope, I think, to get from other countries in the region in order to rebuild. But others do not want to invest, knowing that Hezbollah is going to rebuild and then engage in another war with Israel. Like, we keep seeing this cycle. I mean, the last war, you know, that took place in 2006, we've seen tremendous damage, and then, you know, some countries in the GCC, including Qatar, came in to also, you know, help rebuild. But how many more times are we going to repeat this cycle? Again, going back to our sort of that theme that keeps emerging in this conversation. And you know, President Trump has demonstrated that he can rein in the Israelis and he can pressure Israel with incentives as well. So let's see if this will also take place in Lebanon. But disarmament cannot happen overnight because there are many Lebanese people who also don't support it.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about something also about that Middle East, North Africa, which not on the radar that much, and that's the social movement and youth movement of people over there. Last time we saw the biggest change was they called Arab Spring, which later we found out maybe induced by social media companies, so we're not going to ever go there. Mm-hmm. But the last serious movement, social movement, was in Iraq when people were so fed up with the corruption and they wanted to say something. What's happening in that to the youth in that part of the world? Because some of them are extremely wealthy system, so they don't have much of a problem. Some of them are dealing with the deep corruption and issues like Iraq. Some of them are starting scratch from like Syria. Some part of it is just unknown, like Afghanistan. No one even talks about what's happening over there or what's happening to women. No one even talks about it. It's just
it's
off the map.
Completely.
So if you want to see the social movements, youth movements, women movements, do you see any kind of a game changing in the near future? Because some would say people are getting more modernized, which means more secular view. Maybe Islam is not going to be the huge factor that it used to be in that area. Do you think any trend that gives us some kind of idea what's happening over there with the social movement?
So I think the underlying challenges that have given rise to a lot of these protests, mass protests that we saw that manifested themselves as, you know, the so-called Arab Spring or the Arab uprisings are still very much there. In fact, in many places, they're even worse. And I think the young generation and a lot of these folks were not even, I guess, born actually, or maybe very small during the Arab uprisings, continue to see that a lot of these challenges remain. So if we just zoom into Gen Z, we just witnessed how they have gone out to protest in Morocco, which, you know, for most people, when you say Morocco, you think stability. They have, of course, their fair share of challenges, but nobody anticipated this intensity of protests. And when you really zoom into their grievances, it's all governance. It's just poor governance. It's the state unable to provide quality education that gets them ready for a challenging workforce, particularly with all these technological disruptions that we're seeing, and healthcare, just basic health services, which, again, those are the issues that we are seeing here in America. Those are the issues that most people care about. In the Arab uprisings, 2010 moving forward, we saw this contagion effect pretty much happen very quickly from Tunisia, and then Egypt and other countries in the region, even in the GCC, including Bahrain and Oman. And that's because these grievances are not grievances that only one society is experiencing, but pretty much across the region we're seeing these challenges. In Tunisia, for example, we've seen the Jasmine Revolution really sort of transform the political structure with a new constitution that's more inclusive and pluralistic, and democracy was celebrated. And then every year, support for democracy started decreasing because in the minds of many Tunisians, well, democracy did not get me a job. And in all my visits to Tunis and across Tunisia, this was the one issue that kept coming up. Where are the jobs? And so it is very much a challenge. In Tunisia, I think the youth unemployment is close to 30%. In Jordan, youth unemployment is close to 45%. And this is a country that is surrounded by instability, in the West Bank, also like more stability in Syria, but we still don't know, how the journey would look like for Sharia. So there are, I think, challenges across the board, and I think that youth are so connected online. They're very tech savvy. They're learning everything about the world and about their country from social media. If we look at the various surveys that have been conducted just in the last few years, when they ask the question about where you get your information, do you read the newspapers, do you watch the news, social media is the first source of their knowledge and information and news consumption. And so they will be organizing again, and they will learn from each other. There's also one other factor, based on my conversations with a lot of the activists across the region, because you mentioned the women's movement as well. I mean, a lot of these civil society organizations, particularly those who are working on women's issues and, children's issues, family issues, a lot of the social issues that the governments do not deem important or priorities, they lost a lot of funding. U.S. aid does not exist anymore. It's been dismantled. 83% of the programming has been completely cut out. U.S. assistance does not include supporting a lot of these groups now. There are, I guess, changes happening at the State Department now to see how aid is going to be prioritized. But we have an American base that has elected this president based on America first, right? Which means the rest of the world is not a priority, particularly with this kind of support. And so how are these groups going to self-finance with all the different challenges that they're facing? I think I've heard from some, Afghan activists who are trying to do what they can. Some of them are, self-exiled to Europe and other parts of the region. They're trying to do their best to, maintain some of the projects online, to keep, for example, girls and women, educated through online courses. But those are really very small interventions. And like you said, Afghanistan has completely dropped from the news cycle and from the focus even in the policy community. And so it's going to be, I think, a very challenging time because I cannot predict what's going to happen with youth movements, but the challenges are there. The grievances on the basic governance issues are absolutely still there. In fact, I would say even worse in many countries across the region. And then you have to add on the frustration and anger and pain that people are experiencing because of what they've witnessed in Gaza. And again, some of them have experienced it themselves, whether it's in Iran or whether it's in Syria. And I think this is a disconcerting mix that we could see manifest itself in more protests. But we have to wait and see how governments will respond.
Some of the numbers are staggering. The numbers, unemployment, youth unemployment in Jordan, 45%. It's like technically it's a ticking bomb. So you just you don't know what happens, but surely something will happen.
It is, I always try to look at it as both a crisis and an opportunity, because I think that, with so many educated, if I'm at educated youth without jobs, it's, and given the regional context of war and violence, then yes, they become low-hanging fruit for radicalization and for violent extremists, and it is very worrisome. But the opportunity piece is that they're all highly educated youth, and that's why regional economic integration can help, because you have a GCC that has resources, has capital, they're trying to diversify as well, and in some cases they may need highly skilled workers so they can absolutely employ others, but we're not seeing that either. We're not seeing, too many job opportunities as we did in the past. But perhaps this is where, the emergence of the gig economy with tech connectivity, that's, those can offer some opportunities for employment. And again, it's about changing the social contract and the mindset. Like, there has to be a shift away from the state as a provider of everything, including jobs, because in many of these Arab countries, the state, the government, is the largest employer. And so that's why they're running deficits and, they're bloated. But so shifting it away from state jobs to more entrepreneurship and creating jobs in the private sector. But they need to attract foreign direct investment. And in order to do that, you need to have security and stability. And so that's why all of it is very much interconnected.
Merissa, you're very knowledgeable about the very fascinating part of the world, and we can talk for hours.
Yes.
and I'm very thankful that you've been generous with your time. Allow me to ask my last question. Women movement in that part of the world, I think part of the future of that region, no one can deny that. Last major movement was Women Life Freedom inside Iran. Mm-hmm. We talked about Afghanistan. We perfectly don't even hear or see anything about the right of the women and girls over there. How do you see the role of the women in the social movement change in that part of the world when they have the imbalances are staggering from any scale that you want to?
They are staggering. The World Economic Forum publishes the Gender Gap Index every year, and the Middle East and North Africa region is the 8th region ranked, which is 8th out of 8. So it's the lowest region, that has the lowest ranking, which is very disconcerting. I have a lot of faith in the women's movement. I think women can do a lot when they organize and mobilize. I've met so many highly educated women who have found ways to be educated and to make a difference in the most difficult conditions. It's not going to be an easy time moving forward because, as we mentioned earlier, the lack of funding that's coming in from Europe and particularly from the United States. But I think already a lot of the women groups in the region are coming together to rethink how they can become more self-sustainable financially so that they can continue the work. And I think we will see them emerging in any kind of political change. They remain to represent half of society, across the region, and they're highly educated, and they have an incentive to change their own predicament. So, when Women Life Freedom was, emerging and inspiring so many people in the West in particular, there were also other smaller protests that took place across the Arab world by women groups supporting their Iranian, counterparts. And I think this is very encouraging because, like you said, like these grievances and imbalances are pretty much a feature across the region, with some variations, of course. But I have a lot of hope in women and the women's movement.
Thank you so much for your time, Merissa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.